The long and the short of it from Storylink Radio. 2 versions of the same story. The long version is the entire original work, while the short version is the original book, just squeezed down to a listenable short story. Be sure to look on our channel for both versions. Read along with the story for fun and literacy enhancement. If you are a student, welcome. You just found a great way to learn and experience all that stuff you're supposed to know. Enjoy. Check the description for study notes. If you are a library or educator, please contact us for ways we can help your mission for free. And now, the short version of our story. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë. Charlotte Brontë was one of the novelist daughters of Irish churchman Patrick Brontë. She has many poems and stories to her credit, including Emma and Jane Eyre. There have been dozens of TV, stage, and ballet versions of tonight's story, Jane Eyre. This story also inspired Daphne du Maurier's story, Rebecca, the 1940s movie I Walked with a Zombie, and Jean Rice's The Wide Sargasso Sea. Jane Eyre was orphaned as a child and has felt an outcast her whole young life. Her courage is tested once again when she arrives at Thornfield Hall, where she has been hired by the brooding, proud Edward Rochester to care for his ward Adele. Jane finds herself drawn to this troubled yet kind spirit, and she falls in love. Hard. But there's a terrifying secret in the gloomy, forbidding Thornfield Hall. What is Rochester hiding from Jane? Will Jane be left heartbroken and exiled once again? Let's read on, shall we? Jane Eyre, here we go. Chapter 1. Thornfield, my new home after I left school, was, I found, a fine old battlemented hall. And Mrs. Fairfax, who had answered my advertisement, a mild elderly lady, related by marriage to Mr. Rochester, the owner of the estate and guardian of Adela Verins, my little pupil. It was not until 3 months after my arrival there that my adventures began. One day Mrs. Fairfax proposed to show me over the house, much of which was unoccupied. The third story especially had the aspect of a home of the past, a shrine of memory. I liked its hush and its quaintness. If there were a ghost at Thornfield Hall, this would be its haunt indeed, said Mrs. Fairfax as we passed the range of apartments on our way to see the view from the roof. I was pacing through the corridor of the 3rd floor on my return, when the last sound I expected in so still a region struck my ear. A laugh, distinct, formal, mirthless. At first it was very low, but it passed off in a clamorous peal that seemed to wake an echo in every lonely chamber. "Mrs. Fairfax," I called out, "did you hear that cackle, that laugh? Who is it?" "Oh, it's some of the servants, very likely," she answered. "Perhaps Gracie Poole." The laugh was repeated in a low tone and terminated in an odd murmur. "Gracie!" exclaimed Mrs. Fairfax. I didn't expect Gracie to answer, for the laugh was preternatural. Nevertheless, the door nearest me opened. A servant came out, a set, square-made figure with a hard, plain face. "Too much noise, Gracie," said Mrs. Fairfax. "Remember directions." Gracie curtsied silently and went in. Now, not infrequently after that, I heard Gracie Poole's laugh, and her eccentric murmurs stranger than her laugh. Late one fine, calm afternoon in January, I volunteered to carry to the post at Hay, 2 miles distant, a letter Mrs. Fairfax had just written. The lane to Hay inclined uphill all the way, and having reached the middle, I sat on a stile till the sun went down, and on the hilltop above me stood the rising moon. The village was a mile distant, but in the absolute hush I could hear plainly its murmurs of life. A rude noise broke on the fine ripplings and whisperings of the evening calm. A metallic clatter. A horse was coming. A horse. The windings of the lane hid as it approached. And then I heard a rush under the hedge, and close by glided a great dog, not staying to look up. The horse followed, a tall steed, and on his back a rider. He passed, a sliding sound, a clattering tumble, and the man and the horse were down. They had slipped on the sheet of ice which glazed the causeway. The dog came bounding back, sniffed round the prostrate group, and then ran up to me. It was all he could do. I obeyed him, and I walked down to the traveller, struggling himself free of his steed. I think he was swearing, but I'm not certain. "Can I do anything?" I asked. "Yeah, you can stand one side," he answered as he rose, whereupon being in a heaving, stamping process, accompanied by barking and baying, and the horse was re-established and the dog silenced with a "Down, pilot, down." "If you are hurt and want help, sir," I remarked, I can fetch someone, either from Thornfield Hall or from Hay. Thank you, I shall do. I have no broken bones, only a sprain. And he limped into the stile. This man had a dark face with stern features, a heavy brow. His eyes and gathered eyebrows looked ireful and thwarted. He was past youth, but had not reached middle age. Perhaps he might be 35. I felt no fear of him, but a little shyness. His frown and his roughness set me at ease. He waved me to go, but I said, I cannot think of leaving you in this solitary lane till you are fit to mount your horse, sir. Well, you ought to be at your home yourself. Where do you come from? From just below. You mean the house of the battlements down there? Yes, sir. Whose house is it? Mr. Rochester's. Do you know Mr. Rochester? No, I've never seen him. No. You're not a servant at the hall, of course. You are, I am the governess. Ah, the governess. Deuce take me if I'd forgotten. Excuse me, he continued. Necessity compels me to make you useful. He laid a hand on my shoulder. He limped to his horse. He caught the bridle, and grimacing grimly, he sprang into the saddle with a thank you and bounded away. When I returned from Hay after posting Mrs. Fairfax's letter, I went to her room. She was not there, but sitting upright on the rug was the great black and white long-haired dog. I went forward and said, Pilot! And the thing got up and came to me, sniffed me, wagged his great tail, and I rang the bell. Whose dog is this? Oh, he came with the master, who has just arrived. He's had an accident and his ankle is sprained. The next day I was summoned to take tea with Mr. Rochester and my pupil. When I entered, he was looking at Adele, who knelt on the hearth beside Pilot. Here is Miss Eyre, sir, said Mrs. Fairfax in her quiet way. Mr. Rochester bowed, still not taking his eyes from the group of the dog and the child. I sat down, disembarrassed. Politeness might have confused me. Caprice led me into no obligation. Mrs. Fairfax seemed to think someone should be amiable, and she began to talk. Madam, I should like some tea, was the sole rejoinder she got. Come to the fire, said the master, when the tray was taken away. When you came on me in Hay Lane last night, I thought unaccountably of fairy tales, and I had half a mind to demand whether you had bewitched my horse. I'm not sure yet. Who are your parents? I have none, sir. I thought not. And so you're waiting for your people when you sat on that stile? For whom, sir? For your people, the men in green. Did I break through one of your rings that spread that ice on the causeway? No. I shook my head. Yes, the men in green all forsook England 100 years ago. I don't think either their summer harvest or winter moon will ever shine in their revels more. Mrs. Fairfax dropped her knitting, wondering what sort of talk this was, and remarked that Miss Eyre had been a kind and careful teacher. Don't trouble yourself to give her a character, returned Mr. Rochester. I shall judge for myself. She began by foiling my horse. You said Mr. Rochester was not peculiar, Mrs. Fairfax, I remonstrated, and when I joined her in her room after putting Adele to bed. After a time, my master's manner towards me changed. It became more uniform. I never seemed in his way. He did not take fits of chilling hauteur. When he met me, the encounter seemed welcome. He always had a word and sometimes a smile for me. I felt at times as if he were my relation rather than my master, and so happy did I become that the blanks of existence were filled up. He had now been resident 8 weeks, though Mrs. Fairfax said he seldom stayed at the hall longer than a fortnight. And one night, I hardly know whether I had been sleeping or musing, I started wide awake on hearing a vague murmur, peculiar and lugubrious. It ceased, but my heart beat anxiously. My inward tranquillity was broken. The clock far down in the hall struck 2. Just then my chamber door was touched as if fingers swept the panels, groping away along the dark gallery outside. I was chilled with fear, and then I remembered that it might be Pilot, and the idea calmed me, but it was fated that I should not sleep that night. For the very keyhole of my chamber, as it seemed, a demoniac laugh was uttered. My first impulse was to rise and fasten the bolt, my next to cry, "Who's there?" Ere long, steps retreated up the gallery toward the third-floor staircase. Then all was still. Was it Gracie Poole? I thought to myself. On the 3rd floor? I hurried on my frock. With a trembling hand, opened the door. And there, burning outside, left in the matting of the gallery, was a candle. The air was filled with smoke, which rushed in a cloud from Mr. Rochester's room. In an instant I was within the chamber. Tongues of fire darted around the bed. The curtains were on fire, and in the midst of it all lay Mr. Rochester in deep sleep. I shook him, but he seemed stupefied. Then I rushed to his basin and ewer, and I deluged the bed with water. He woke with a cry. "Oh, is there a flood? What is it? What is it?" I briefly related what had transpired. He was now in his dressing gown, and warning me to stay where I was and call no one, he added, "I must pay a visit to the third floor." A long time elapsed ere he returned, pale and gloomy. "I found it all out," he said. "It is as I thought. You are no talking fool. Say nothing about it. You hear me? Nothing." He held out his hand as we parted. I gave him mine. He took it in both his own. "You've saved my life. I have a pleasure in owing you since so immense a debt. I feel your benefits no burden, Jane." Strange energy was in his voice, strange fire in his look. Till morning I was tossed on a buoyant but unquiet sea. In the morning I heard the servants exclaim how providential that master thought of the water jug when he had left the candle alight. In passing the room I saw sewing rings on the new curtains, no other than Gracie Poole. Company now came to the hall, including the beautiful Miss Ingram, who rumor associated with Mr. Rochester, as I heard from Mrs. Fairfax. One day Mr. Rochester had been called away from home, and on his return, as I was his first intimate of the house to meet him, I remarked, "Oh, are you aware, Mr. Rochester, the stranger has arrived since you left this morning?" "A stranger? No, I expected no one. Did he give you his name?" "His name is Mason, sir. Mason, and he comes from the West Indies." Mr. Rochester was standing near me, and as I spoke he gave my wrist a convulsive grip while a spasm caught his breath, and he turned whiter than ashes. "Do you feel ill, sir?" Jane, I've got a blow. I've got a blow, Jane." He staggered. Then he sat down and made me sit beside him. "My little friend," said he to me, "I wish I were in a quiet island with only you, when trouble and danger and hideous recollections were removed from me." Can I help you, sir? I'd give my life to serve you, sir." "Jane, if aid is wanted, I will seek it at your hands." "Thank you, sir. Tell me what to do." "Go back into the room. Step up quietly to Mason. Tell him Mr. Rochester has come and wishes to see him. Show him in here, and then leave me." So at a late hour that night I heard the visitors repair to their chamber, Mr. Rochester saying, "This way, Mason. This is your room." He spoke cheerfully, and the gay tones set my heart at ease. Then, awakening in the dead of night, I stretched my hand to draw the curtain, for the moon was full and bright. And then, good God, what a cry! The night was rent in twain by a savage, shrilly sound that ran from the end to end of Thornfield Hall. The cry died and was not renewed. Indeed, whatever being uttered that fearful shriek under the full of the moon could not soon repeat it. Not the widest-winged condor from the Andes could twice in succession send out such a yell from the clouds shrouding his Eyre. And it came. That hideous scream came out of the third story. And overheard, yes, in that room just above my chamber, I heard a deadly struggle, a half-smothered voice shout, "Help! Help! Help! Help!" The chamber door opened. Someone rushed along the gallery. Another step stamped on the floor above, and something fell. Then there was silence. The sleepers were all aroused and gathered in the gallery, which but for the moonlight would have been in complete darkness. The door at the end of the gallery opened, and Mr. Rochester advanced with a candle. He just descended from the upper story. All right, he cried. "A servant has had a nightmare, that's all, and has taken a fit with fright. Now I must see you all back to your rooms." And so by dint of coaxing and commanding, he contrived to get them back to their dormitories. I retreated unnoticed, and I dressed myself carefully to be ready for emergencies. About an hour passed, and then a cautious hand tapped low at my door. Jane, are you up and dressed?" "Yes." "Then come out quietly." Mr. Rochester stood in the gallery holding a light. "Bring a sponge and some volatile salts," said he. I did so and followed. "Jane, you don't turn sick at the sight of blood, do you?" I think not. I've never been tried yet." We entered a room with an inner apartment, from whence a snarling, snatching sound. Mr. Rochester went forward into this apartment, and a shout of laughter greeted his entrance. Gracie Poole then was there. When he came out, he closed the door behind him. "Here, Jane, here." I walked round to the other side of the large bed in the outer room, and there, in an easy-chair, his head leaned back, I recognized the pale and seemingly lifeless face of the stranger, Mason. His linen on one side and one arm was almost soaked in blood. Mr. Rochester took the sponge, dipped it in water, moistened the corpse-like face, and applied my smelling bottle to the nostrils. Mr. Mason unclosed his eyes and murmured, "Is there an immediate danger?" "May a scratch. I'll fetch a surgeon now. You'll be removed by the morning. Jane, you'll sponge the blood when he returns. Put your salts to his nose. You'll not speak to him on any pretext. And Richard, it will be at the peril of your life if you speak to her. You understand me both." 2 hours later, the surgeon came and removed the injured man. In the morning, I heard Rochester in the yard saying to some of the visitors, "Mason got the start of you all this morning. He's gone before sunrise. I rose to see him off." A splendid midsummer shone over England then. In the sweetest hour of 24, after the sun had gone down in simple state, the dew fell cool on the panting plain. I had walked into the orchard to the giant horse-chestnut near the sunk fence that separates the hall grounds from the lonely fields, when there came to me the warning fragrance of Mr. Rochester's cigar. I was about to retreat when he intercepted me and said, "Turn back, Jane. On so lovely a night it is a shame to sit in the house." I did not like to walk alone with my master at this hour in the shadowy orchard, but I could find no reason for leaving him. "Jane," he recommenced, as we slowly strayed down in the direction of the horse-chestnut, "Thornfield is a pleasant place in the summer, is it not?" "Oh, yes, sir." "You must have become in some degree attached to it." "Oh, I am attached to it indeed, sir." "That's a pity," he said, and paused. "Oh, must I move on then, sir?" I asked him. Yes, I believe you must, Jane." Now this was a blow, but I did not let it prostrate me. "Then, and you're going to be married, sir?" "In about a month I hope to be a bridegroom. We've been good friends, Jane, have we not?" "Yes, sir." "Here's the chestnut tree. Come, we'll sit here in peace tonight." He seated me and himself. "Jane, do you hear the nightingales singing in the woods? Listen." In listening, I sobbed convulsively, for I could repress what I endured no longer, and when I did speak, it was only to express an impetuous wish that I had never been born or never come to Thornfield. "Because you're sorry to leave it?" he asked me. The vehemence of emotion was claiming mastery and struggling for full sway to overcome, to live, to rise and reign at last, and yes, even to speak. "I grieve to leave Thornfield. I love Thornfield, sir, because I have lived in it a full and delightful life. I have not been trampled upon. I have not been petrified. I have talked face to face with what I delight in, an original, vigorous, and expanded mind. I have known you, Mr. Rochester. I see the necessity of departure, but it's like looking at the necessity of death." "Where do you see the necessity?" he asked suddenly. "Do you think I can stay to become nothing to you?" I retorted, roused to something like passion. "Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, that I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong, sir. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. I am not talking to you now through the medium of custom, conventionalities, or even mortal flesh. It is my spirit, sir, that addresses your spirit, just as if both had passed to the grave and we stood at God's feet equal, as we are. As we are." Yes, as we are," repeated Mr. Rochester, gathering me to his heart and pressing his lips on my lips. "And so, Jane?" "Yes, so, sir," I replied. "I have spoken my mind and can go anywhere now. Let me go." Jane, be still. Don't struggle so, like a wild, frantic bird rending its own plumage in its desperation." "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will, which I now exert to leave you." Another effort set me at liberty, and I stood erect before him. "And your will shall decide your destiny. I offer you my hand, Jane. I offer you my hand, my heart, and a share in all my possessions." A waft of wind came sweeping down the laurel walk and trembled through the boughs of the chestnut. It wandered away to an infinite distance, and it died. The nightingale's song was then the only voice of the hour, and listening to it again I wept. Mr. Rochester sat looking at me gently, and at last said, drawing me to him again, "My bride is here, because my equal is here, and my likeness. Jane, will you marry me? Give me my name, Edward, Say, I will marry you.
Are you in earnest? Do you love me? Do you sincerely wish me to be your wife?
I do, I swear it.
Then, sir, I will marry you.
God pardon me, and man meddle not with me. I have her, and I will hold her.
But what had befallen the knight, and what ailed the chestnut tree? It writhed and groaned, while the wind roared in the laurel walk.
We must go in, said Mr. Rochester. The weather changes.
He hurried me up the path, but we were wet before I could pass through the threshold. There were no groomsmen, no bridesmaids, no relatives to wait for or marshal, none but Mr. Rochester and I. I wonder what other bridegroom looked as he did, so bent up to a purpose, so resolutely grim. Our place was taken at the communion rails. All was still. 2 shadows only moved in the remote corner of the church. The clergyman's lips unclosed to ask, "Wilt thou have this woman for thy wedded wife?" A distant and near voice said, "The marriage cannot go on. I declare the existence of an impediment." "What is the nature of the impediment?" asked the clergyman. "It simply consists in the existence of a previous marriage," said the speaker. "Mr. Rochester has a wife now alive, living." My nerves vibrated at those low-spoken words as they had never vibrated to thunder. I looked at Mr. Rochester. I made him look at me. His face was colorless rock, his eye both spark and flint. He seemed as if he would defy all things. "Mr. Mason, have the goodness to step forward," said the stranger. "Are you aware, sir, whether or not this gentleman's wife is still living?" inquired the clergyman. "She is now alive and living at Thornfield Hall," said Mason with white lips. "I saw her there last April. I am her brother." I saw a grim smile contract Mr. Rochester's lips. "Enough," said he. "Wood," to the clergyman, "close your book. John Green," to the clerk, "leave the church. There'll be no wedding this day." Bigamy is an ugly word," Mr. Rochester continued. "But I meant to be a bigamist. This girl thought all was fair and legal and never dreamt she was going to be entrapped into a feigned union with a defrauded wretch already bound to a bad, mad, and imbruted partner. Follow me. I invite you all to visit Gracie Poole's patient and my wife." "Yes, my wife." And so we passed up to the 3rd story, and there in the deep shade of the inner room beyond the room where I had watched over the wounded Mason, ran backward and forward, seemingly on all fours, a figure, whether beast or human, or one could not at first sight tell. This thing snatched and growled like some wild animal. It was covered with clothing, but a quantity of dark grizzled hair, wild as a mane, hid its head and face.
"Yes, that is my wife," said Mr. Rochester, "whom I was cheated into marrying 15 years ago. A mad woman and a drunkard, a family of idiots and maniacs for 3 generations, and this is what I wish to have," laying his hand upon my shoulder, "this young girl who stands so grave and quiet at the mouth of hell. Jane, Jane, I never meant to wound you thus."
Now, dear listener, I forgave him at the moment, on the spot. I forgave him all, yet not in words, not outwardly, only at my heart's core. That night I never thought to sleep, but a slumber fell on me as soon as I lay down in bed, and in my sleep a vision broke to my spirit. "Daughter, flee temptation." I rose at the dim dawn. One word comprised my intolerable duty: depart. So, after 3 days wandering and starvation on the North Midland moors, for hastily and secretly I had traveled by coach as far from Thornfield as my money could carry me, I found a temporary home at the vicarage of Morton, until the clergyman of that moorland parish, Mr. St. John Rivers, secured for me, under the assumed name of Jane Elliot, the mistress-ship of the village school. At Christmas I left the school. As the spring advanced, St. John Rivers, who with an icy heroism was possessed by the idea of becoming a missionary, urged me strongly to accompany him to India as his wife, on the grounds that I was docile, diligent, and courageous, and would be very useful to him. I felt such veneration for him that I was tempted to cease struggling with him, to rush down the torrent of his will into the gulf of his existence, and there lose my own. But then the time came when he called on me to decide. I fervently longed to do what was right, and only that. Show me the path. Show me the path, I entreated of heaven. My heart beat fast and thick. I heard its throb. Suddenly it stood still to an inexpressible feeling that it thrilled it through. My senses rose expectant. Ear and eye waited. While the flesh quivered on my bones, I saw nothing, but I heard a voice. I heard a voice somewhere cry, "Jane, Jane, Jane," and nothing more. "Oh, God, what is it? What is it?" I gasped. I might have said, "Where is it?" For it did not seem in the room, nor in the house, nor in the garden, nor from overhead. It was the voice of a human being, a loved, well-remembered voice. The voice of Edward Fairfax Rochester, and it spoke in pain and woe, wildly, eerily, urgently. "I am coming," I cried. "Wait for me." And I ran out in the garden. It was void. "Down, superstition," I commented, as that spectre rose up black by the black yew at the gate. I mounted to my chamber. I locked myself in. I fell on my knees, and I seemed to penetrate a very near mighty spirit, and my soul rushed out in gratitude at his feet. Then I rose from the thanksgiving. I took a resolve, and I lay down unscared, enlightened now, eager but for the daylight. 36 hours later, I was crossing the fields to where I could see the full front of my master's mansion, and looking with a timorous joy, I saw blackened ruin. Where, meantime, was the hapless owner? I returned to the inn, where the host himself, a respectable middle-aged man, brought my breakfast into the parlor. I scarcely knew how to begin my questions. Is Mr. Rochester living at Thornfield Hall now?" "Oh, no, ma'am, no. No one's living up there. It was burnt down at harvest time. The fire broke out at dead of night." Was it known how it originated?" "Well, they guessed, ma'am, they guessed. There was a lady, you see, a lunatic kept in that house. Yes, she's a lunatic. She had a woman to take care of her called her Mrs. Poole, an able woman, but for one fault, she kept a private bottle of gin by her, she did, and the mad lady would take the keys out of her pocket and let herself out of the chamber to go roaming about the house, doing any wild mischief that came into her head. Well, her keeper there laid his snuggerated Mr. Rochester was at home when the fire broke out, and he went up to the attics and got the servants out of their beds, and then went back to get his mad wife out of her cell. And then they called out to him that she was up on the roof, and there she was waving her arms and shouting till they could hear her a mile off. Oh, she's a big woman now, yes. She's a big woman. She had long black hair. We could see it streaming against the flames as she stood. We saw Mr. Rochester approach her and call out, "Bertha!" And then, ma'am, she wailed and she gave a spring, and the next minute she lay dead, smashed on the pavement. Were any other lives lost?" No. Perhaps it would have been better if they had. Oh, poor Mr. Edward, he's stone blind now. Stone blind he is. I dreaded that he was mad. As he came down the great staircase, it fell, and he was taken out of the ruins with one eye knocked out and one hand so crushed the surgeon had to amputate directly the other eye. His other eye, poor thing. He lost sight of that also, all inflamed and whatnot. Well, where does he live now, sir? Live? Oh, well. He's over at Ferndane, a manor house over on the farm he has. Quite a desolate spot, ask me. Old John and his wife are with him, and he would have none else. And so, to Ferndane I came just ere dusk, walking the last mile. As I approached, the narrow front door of the grange slowly opened, and a figure came out of the twilight, a man without a hat. He stretched forth his hand to feel whether it rained. It was my master, Edward Fairfax Rochester. He groped his way back to the house, and re-entering it, closed the door. I now drew near and knocked, and John's wife opened it for me. "Mary," I said, "how are you?" Mary started as if she had seen a ghost. I calmed her and followed her into the kitchen, when I explained in a few words that I should stay for the night and that John must fetch my trunk from the turnpike house. At this moment the parlour bell rang. Mary proceeded to fill a glass with water and place it on a tray, together with candles. "Give the tray to me, Mary. I'll carry it in." The old dog Pilot pricked up his ears as I entered the room, and then he jumped up with a yelp and bounded towards me, almost knocking the tray from my hands. What's the matter? What's the matter?" inquired Mr. Rochester. He put out his hand with a quick gesture. Who is this?" he demanded imperiously. "Will you have a little more water, sir? I spilled half of what was in the glass." "What is it? Who speaks to me? Who speaks?" "Pilot knows me. John and Mary know I am here." He groped, and resting his wandering hand, I prisoned it in both mine. Ah, her very fingers, her small slight fingers. Is it Jane? Jane Eyre? My dear master, I am Jane Eyre. I have found you out, and I am come back to you. Listener, I married him.
Thank you for listening. Check our channel for many more stories. Visit our website at www.storylinkradio.com.